Industry Development Manager with Meat and Livestock Australia. I'll be acting as your facilitator for today's webinar. The topic for today is a bit of a story about a case study surrounding a cluster fencing project out towards Morven in Western Queensland. And the cluster fencing project was a multi-pronged targeted project looking at ways to better control grazing pressure, as well as additional control methods for pests such as pigs, cats and dogs in the area. Cluster fencing is a bit of a controversial topic at the moment. As you might have seen, there's been quite a few articles and so forth written in Queensland Country Life and so forth in the last couple of months as people try to decide the best ways to manage the dog issue. And we thought, well, given that, given those things in the media at the moment, we thought it timely that we have a bit of a webinar and a presentation to people who might be interested from some people who've been involved in cluster fencing and so forth firsthand. I should mention today that today's webinar will be recorded, and if you are having any issues with your audio, there's two ways to listen into today's webinar. The first is through your computer speakers, and the second is just dialing in using your landline or mobile, and the phone number and access code are currently on your screen at the moment. We've got two guest speakers for you today. The first is Amy Gunn. So Amy works for Western Local Land Services in New South Wales, and Amy's been involved in a couple of different cluster fencing type projects throughout her working life. Amy's going to give us a bit of an overview of, I suppose, the system and some of the pros and cons that people would need to have a think about when considering implementing a cluster fencing type program in their local area. Our second guest speaker is Will Roberts. So Will is a producer out towards Morven in Western Queensland, and Will owns and runs a property called Victoria Downs with sheep and cattle. Will was the driving force behind the establishment of a cluster fencing project in the Morven area, and that was a bit of a pilot sort of trial for that area. So Will's here today to give you some first-hand insights into his experiences in the cluster fencing type setup. If you have any questions at all as we run through the webinar, please just scroll over to the webinar control panel, which should be on the right-hand side of your computer. You'll notice there's a bit of an expandable box where you can type in questions for either of the guest speakers. Please feel free to do that at any point as we're going through the webinar. All of the attendees are on silent just to control the noise and background feedback and stuff coming through the speakers. So I can see those questions as they're coming through, and I can ask those on your behalf once we have a break between speakers. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first guest speaker, which is Amy Gunn. Amy, if you're okay to begin, I've just got your presentation up there now, which everyone should be able to see. And as I mentioned, Amy works for Western Local Land Services. So Amy's, again, just going to give us a bit of an overview about the cluster fencing concept. Amy, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Julie, and hi, everyone. As Julie said, my name's Amy Gunn. I'm a livestock officer with Local Land Services based at Cobar, and I live with my husband on a property northwest of Condobolin. So today I've been invited to speak to you all about what has been so far a very successful collaborative area management project in the Morven district in Queensland. I'm referring to the pest exclusion cluster fencing projects that are currently underway, and you've no doubt read and heard about in the papers. Before I begin, I'd just like to recognise 3 key points. Number 1 being pest exclusion cluster fencing might not be a feasible option for everyone, but it may and very well has been a success other producers. Secondly, the concept of collaborative area management that I'm talking about today will be given strictly from a landholder's perspective. Will and Nada from Victoria Downs, as well as Peter Bryant from Albury at Mungalala, have kindly provided me with all their information and outcomes, as well as opinions on their investment in forming these cluster groups and erecting these pest animal exclusion fences. And thirdly, if Julie, you could go to the next slide. So thirdly, I'd like to recognise that there is no silver bullet for pest animal management. Strategic and regular action using a suite of techniques is key. Activities such as baiting, trapping and shooting are all very common, but not one of these is a standalone solution. So pest exclusion fencing does not eliminate the need to continue these activities, but it does over time minimise it. Julie, I've forwarded some handouts that I've provided at talks I've done sort of in Western New South Wales, and Julie will be able to provide you with those if you'd like them. I'm sure she can email them or something. But anyway, next slide please, Julie. So I'm just going to mention a few of the challenges. So many of you may well be in the same boat or heading in the same direction as many landholders in Queensland. You've invested heavily, time, money and emotionally with implementing numerous sustainable ag practices, whether it's been days spent at workshops, implementing, rotational grazing regimes, improving water and fencing infrastructure, participating in pest, animal and weed control programs, the list goes on. And yet you still feel like your back's against the wall. We're still facing the same issues, whether it's limited or lost capacity entirely to manage your grazing pressure, or you've just had to go completely out of sheep because of predation. And now you're finding that your cattle herd weaning rates are headed in the same direction. I've had countless conversations with landholders over the last few years when I was based up in Queensland and now down here, that they go along the same lines of, so what do we do now? We've signed up to the RCS grazing for profit, we've implemented the spell and graze regime, we've improved our fences, increased our watering points. It's bloody dry, there's no water, and even if we do get a shower on a paddock we're spelling, 1 million kangaroos move in. So you may as well have had 1,000 wethers grazing it instead. So these are just some of the challenges producers and the community at large are facing, with loss of stocking enterprise options, limited access to markets, declines in land value, and the bottom line, loss of production and profitability. Next slide please, Julie. Further challenges, not wanting to depress you even further, I'd like to mention the impact of the mass migrations of kangaroo populations across the landscape, particularly after rain events. I will, on behalf of these cluster groups, emphasise that the intention is not to eradicate native animal populations totally, such as kangaroos and emus. There is a hope that numbers might revert to more sustainable levels with these fences, but it's, limiting that mass migration when you're getting the isolated showers across the landscape. So this not only helps to achieve control over grazing pressure and drought proofing, but it's also vital for a balanced ecosystem. Next slide please, Julie. So further challenges, shrinking rural communities, loss of job opportunities, recession of service providers and skills, mental health issues, impact on native animal species, and impact on native plant species, and your pasture composition, woody weed invasions, soil degradation and erosion, leading to increased sedimentation in waterways. Next slide, please. So, pest exclusion cluster fencing, what is it? Going off the Morven Cluster, I'm going to focus on. It's not at all a new concept. Cluster fencing is the idea of a group of landholders getting together and fencing the perimeter of a number of properties with essentially what's a higher than average fence, not dissimilar to the old dog netting boundary fences, just new and improved, obviously. And many of you are thinking therein lies the first and most challenging hurdle, getting neighbours to agree. And we'll come back to that in a second, but I'll just give a brief overview of what the Morven Cluster fencing, what they've used. So essentially it's 1.6 metres in height with barb on top and either barb or a fixed knot netting apron on the bottom. Due to the higher cost associated with this fence, as opposed to just fencing in a single property, cluster groups with a greater area demonstrate stronger economies of scale, along with greater public benefit and value for money in terms of groups such as Southwest NRM groups investing in it. So the benefit can then be looked at in a cost per acre sense. We'll look into the costings further in a minute, but make no mistake, this is a notably more expensive fence than your average hinge joint or western fence, say. So in saying that, the fencing products available are becoming more and more competitive, and you know, you've got Southern Wire, Waratah, and Clipex, just to name a few of your major manufacturers that are coming in with different designs and materials. Next slide, please. So this cluster fencing project came about late 2012, I guess. Southwest NRM, based in Southwest Queensland, sought expressions of interest for the establishment of 3 clusters as trials in Southwest Queensland to explore the economic and environmental merit of this collaborative area management. So responsibility was put on the landholders to form these groups and essentially sort out the politics amongst themselves and then build their expression of interest to meet specific criteria based on strong public benefit, value for money, and 50-50 contributions from the cluster groups to match the funding that would be provided. The Morven Cluster has become a bit of a showcase, and the Mungalala Cluster is still in the building phase. It joins Morven Cluster on the southern end. Can you still hear me, Julie?
Yep, all clear.
Oh, okay, no worries. Next slide, please. So the Morven Cluster was obviously one of the successful applications. It covers an area of approximately 1.1 million acres, and the length of the fence is close to 410 k's. This worked out at a cost relative to the area fence of $2 an acre. It involved the 50-50 in-kind contributions from landholders to project funding. It also involved the formation of a management team by the cluster group for the maintenance of the fence, and a body corporate also was formed to resolve issues. It also involved the establishment of a maintenance fund at a contribution rate of 2 cents per acre per year. Next slide, please, Julie. This slide's I've just put in a few photos just so you can see that there's, you know, a dozen ways to skin a cat, but with the Morven Cluster they had sort of some rules, I guess, in place to maintain a degree of quality in the fence. So this was sort of maintained throughout the whole integrity of the fence, but there are a few different ways that landholders could obviously put it up. Next slide, please. So in forming one of these clusters, the major challenges was not so much the cost, but getting neighbours to agree. Furthermore, getting them to agree to a legally binding contract, you know. So essentially Southwest NRM left it to the landholders to handle the politics. You know, they know their neighbours best. There's no need for an outsider to try and facilitate that. And with the Morven Cluster, the wild dog groups and the like were already so well established and proactive and adapted to communicating and dealing with each other that it really helped both the Morven and Mangala clusters to get off the ground. So further challenges involved deciding who's in and who's out. Difficult neighbours that might not participate in baiting programs, do you fence them in or do you fence them out? National parks, absentee landholders, these were all some of the issues that had to be decided amongst the group. As I mentioned earlier, forming a management group, the body corp, and the commitment to annual contributions to the fund for repairs and maintenance of the fence. They also had a sale of land agreement similar to your transferable water agreement to ensure that there was a continued commitment to the fence if land was sold. The pest exclusion fence at Morven and that up around Tambo are now viewed as value adding. So being inside the cluster as opposed to outside has had a major impact when you think about land values in particular. It was also important that people involved in the cluster agreed to continue to participate in their pest, animal and weed controls activities like your wild dog baiting, pigs, foxes, you know, even Parthenium really at Morven. So next slide, please. Get to the benefits. So the benefits of this cluster, there's been reports of 100% return on investment within 18 months, which is just massive, really. When the cost of erecting the fence, you know, when it's getting around the $6,000 per K mark, to have a return on investment in 18 months was a massive draw card. Huge public and private benefit that promoted sustainable landscapes and rural communities. Increased productivity, enterprise diversification, profitability in landholders and land value, increased ability to manage ground cover and produce feed budgets, increased success with spell graze regimes, improved capacity to manage your pest, animal and weed problems. And there's just a little quote down there that Will provided me with last year. He said, "This will be one of the greatest leaps forward for our grazing enterprise. It ranks up there with tree clearing and buffel grass. We'll get back control of predators and total grazing pressure." So yeah, as Julie said, if you've got any questions, feel free to message them in now and Julie can ask, and I'd be happy to try and respond to those. Next slide, please. And next slide again. And I've just got some acknowledgements there for the landholders that provided me with all their data and feedback, essentially, and Southwest NRM. So yeah, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Amy. That was an excellent presentation. Just a reminder to people, if you did have any questions for any of our presenters this morning, you can type those into the questions panel, which you'll find on the right-hand side of your screen in the control panel for the webinar program there. Amy, look, thanks very much for that overview. That was excellent. So you mentioned that there was a couple of different cluster fencing projects going in around that Morven Mangalawa area. Are you aware of any others sort of coming in or in different areas as well?
Yeah, well, sort of just talking to people from Southwest NRM, they were asking for another round of expressions of interest for the formation of similar cluster groups. I'm not sure what the outcome's been of that, who's in and who's out. Down here at the moment, I'm currently working on some small demonstration sites. We've got Waratah, Southern Wire and Clipex involved, and essentially they'll have ownership of a site each on a property on a major highway within Western New South Wales, and they're going to put in sort of 500-metre strains of the different types of pest exclusion fencing that they are offering at the moment. And these will be fenced into a square so we can, over time, see the changes in ground cover.
Okay, excellent. Just a question from one of the audience members here, just wanting to know how the fence prevents predators or other animals from digging under.
Yep, we'll probably be able to go into this a bit further, but there's a few different designs, as I mentioned. The Mormon Cluster have used the apron, which is a fixed knot apron that extends on the ground. And otherwise, other people have found, running the barbed wire along the bottom has also helped. I have had feedback from landholders that said the roos will start digging from time to time and start sort of trying to work a hole through it. But if you go along and just keep plugging in those holes, they eventually sort of stop, and that sort of stops their movement through their old stomping ground, I guess.
Okay, excellent. Was there a requirement for the clusters to be registered with the local councils?
Not that I'm aware of, but that's probably something Will can talk a bit more about because he was so instrumental in getting the Morven Cluster off the ground.
Will, did you want to add any comment in there?
No, we certainly don't have to be registered with any of with our local shire group, that's for sure. But just one of the things that we'll talk about through my presentation was because we're part of the Moa Shire Pest Management program, we were given sort of relaxed tree clearing guidelines along the fence, and we actually didn't have to get a permit to do the tree clearing along the perimeter of the fence.
Sure. And just another question coming through. Did you sort of notice or record any improved populations of perennial ground cover plants, grasses, etc.?
Is that for me?
Either of you.
You go ahead,
well, yeah, well, certainly landholders south of Morven, he's part of the boundary of our cluster group, but he also fenced himself in at the same time, and they recorded a rainfall event of 40 points of rain, so only 40 points, and yet there was a significant difference between the ground cover that occurred on sort of his side of the fence compared to the ground cover outside. So during the time when he fenced himself, it was very, very dry down there, and of course he sort of was able to exclude most of the kangaroos from his area. and as a result of that, having sort of very low roo populations inside the fence, his 40 points of rain gave him sort of some green shoots, and outside the fence where he actually had cattle grazing on that country. So even with the cattle on it, he recorded sort of ground cover sort of increasing, whereas outside the fence there was zero ground cover, and he just said it was just unbelievable. When you drove along the fence, you'd think the rain had stopped at the fence.
Yeah.
Could I just add to that, Julie? From personal experience, my husband and we've put up a 110 hinge joint with barb on top of that and barb on the bottom, just out on our western boundary. Just being relatively new to the district, we've tried a bunch of different fencing options. We've got a bit of western in with electricity, and we've tried the smaller, shorter hinge joint, and then we decided to try this 110 stuff, and just the difference. If a roo's really under pressure, it will try to jump it, and more often than not clears it, no worries. But if they're not under pressure and just moving along, which we observed while we were putting it up, they'll just poke up to it, have a look, poke down it a bit, and then eventually they've just stopped coming across it. And our neighbours have said that since the fence has gone up, they've noticed the change in the roo populations and the goats now running in parts of his place that he didn't have so many before. He said has been phenomenal. So that's the fence we've put up is by no means to the same standard as the Morven Cluster, but just the change that it's made so far, just with our ground cover, just a bit more sustainable biodiversity, I guess. And we don't have a dog issue at the moment, but we believe that with the dog numbers that are sort of coming from all sides of us, it's only a matter of time.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Amy. And I guess that also does bring up, I suppose, another potential detraction from this kind of system. If you're an opportunistic goat harvester, it is certainly going to interrupt the flow of animals that might be coming through onto your property. So obviously that's got to be, I guess, managed and factored into any sort of fence construction. And I guess if you're in a really high pressure sort of area with those pest animals such as the dogs and so forth, perhaps it just gives you the option to have some smaller stock on the place, whether they be sheep or goats, without those, I guess, getting slaughtered quite as much. Look,
and I think
we do have.
Sorry.
Yep.
Like, you've got to do the sums for yourself, obviously, and see if it's going to work for you or not. But like we decided, we harvest, on average 100 goats a month, which isn't a great deal, but we sort of decided if we can slowly fence our property so we can control our grazing pressure better, we'd much prefer to be running, say, a dorper than a goat at the end of the day. It's going to be more profitable for us.
Yep. Cool. Thank you very much for that, Amy. We do have a couple of other questions coming through, but I think some of those are actually going to be addressed in Will's presentation. So, Will, if it's all right with you, we might move on to your presentation now.
No worries.
So as I mentioned, Will owns and runs a property called Victoria Downs, which is just centred around the Morven in Western Queensland. So Will, without further ado, we might kick off with your presentation. Thanks.
Thanks, Julie. So can you put up the first slide then?
Yes, it should be up there now.
Something's happened.
Are you seeing?
We've just got the last one of Amy's.
Okay, hang on. Close Amy. Sorry everyone, we're just having some technical issues. Okay, can you see your presentation up there now, Will?
No. Amy might be able.
I can see it.
We might have computer trouble.
We might just ask some of the attendees, if you could just pop into your question box there and just let me know whether or not you're able to see Will's presentation. It should just be a white screen with a map showing Victoria Downs. Okay. All right, everyone else can see it, Will, so maybe if you just want to open the presentation that I sent you on your computer and run through it and just tell me when you're changing slides, that'd be great.
Righto, yeah, well, I got the map in front of me, so we, as Julie sort of said, we live in central southern Queensland. Our property is 13,000 hectares. We've got a balance of sort of open downs country and timbered country, and it's sort of in a 21-inch rainfall area. So that's basically what we've got. We've got about 5,000 acres, hectares, I mean, of open downs country and about 7,000 hectares of timbered country. So we go to the next slide. That sort of talks about before the fence. And as it says there, we've got 13,000 hectares. We had our first dog bite in about 2000. Prior to that, we'd never seen a dog print here or a dog bite. And that was mainly due to the fact that we had very good neighbours, because our neighbours at the time were experiencing sort of dog bites, and it just was a gradual process for us as the pressure got bigger and bigger. We gradually started to get more and more pressure, and so the dogs eventually got here. I think we're pretty lucky geographically where we are, because we're on the bottom end usually where the dogs come from every direction. So we've been very fortunate that we've had very good neighbours. Most of the people in our area did run sheep, but now most of them don't run sheep because of the dog situation. As it says there, 13-14 was our worst year for dogs to date, and this has all basically come around from increasing pressure outside our area. We instigated our dog trapping program, as it says down there, and we were hoping other people would sort of take it on as well, but we didn't get any sort of support outside our area. And in fact, groups of people who were doing a reasonable job sort of slowly did less and less as they got more and more overrun with the dogs. So it just led to greater and greater pressure in our area. Then we've reduced our sheep numbers basically to 3,000. We used to run about 3,000 breeding ewes. Now we run about sort of 1,200 breeding ewes. And that sort of made it a lot harder from that point of view, but we've increased our cattle numbers sort of slowly, and gradually, sort of as it says there, we increased our cow numbers to about 500, and we ran about 1,500 dry cattle, but as a result of the drought, we don't have anywhere near those numbers on just presently at the moment. In this area here, we've had sort of coordinated baiting programs since the early to mid-90s, I suppose, as people sort of not far away from us started to get more and more pressure. They started encouraging more and more of us to sort of get into our 1080 baiting programs, and it was probably, I think, environmentally one of the best things we've ever sort of become part of. And as a result of sort of doing that, we've seen significant increases in our native animal population and ground-dwelling creatures and all that sort of thing. And then, as it says there, in 2009 we started our trapping program, and this was after sort of our, as I said, our coordinated baiting programs for a number of years. And prior to starting our trapping program sort of north of Morven here, one of the reasons why we did that was because south of Morven started a coordinated trapping program that year, and they caught about 50 dogs. So we thought we'd try and get some people up here to, the same trapper up here, to do the trapping north of Morven. And prior to getting everybody sort of involved in it and sort of getting them to agree to sort of fund the program, we rang everybody and nobody had a dog problem. And that time he actually caught, on 14 properties north of Morven, he caught 160 dogs in 10 weeks. And it was just interesting that nobody thought they had a dog problem, and yet there were more wild dogs up here than there were domestic dogs. And in our area, our baiting programs had been working because they've been cleaning up a lot of the young dogs, but there were a lot of old dogs still sort of sitting around in our area. And as it says there on that slide, when we first did our trapping programs, where all the pressure areas were, which was mainly sort of to the north, they used to get about a 3-month reprieve once we finished our trapping program and the trapper had cleaned all the dogs out. And then basically as the pressure increased more and more from outside, so increased dog numbers outside our area, basically once the trapper left, the dogs walked in behind him. And so that was when we sort of started to realise, I suppose, in 2012 or 13, it was time for us to start to look at alternatives, because we're part of the Merway Shire wild dog group in this area, but we could just see that some of the groups were sort of fracturing, and that was only going to put more and more pressure on us, and so it really gave us impetus to try and move forward. And we were very lucky, really, because we started off with our coordinated sort of baiting programs, and that sort of gets everybody talking to each other. Then we moved to our coordinated trapping program, and when you've got people sort of putting their hand in their pocket, the first year we did that the trapping program, it cost each landholder just a bit over $5,000, I think, and so it's quite a significant financial investment for the landholders, but it helps sort of bond people together, and we don't have a very sort of formalised group from that point of view, and we just had a couple of people organising the dishing out of the bills and things, and nobody's ever sort of quibbled about what they've got to pay or how come they've got to pay this amount of money. So we've been very, very lucky from that point of view that everybody's prepared to work together and trust other people. And then we move on to the slide there showing you before the fence. Is that right, Julie?
Yep.
Yep. So that's just a photograph that was taken in our area. It's not on Victoria Downs, but it just sort of shows what condition some of the fences were in. Some people obviously look after their side of the fence, and then other people let the timber grow right up to it. And then the next slide is just the one of the roos coming up to the fence line, so that's the same sort of thing. And then the next slide there then shows the new fence erected and the roo population on the outside of the fence. So then we go on to the slide showing the Morven Cluster. And as Amy said, it's an area of approximately 1.1 million acres. The total length of the fence is about 409 kilometres. That total length sort of includes about 79 kilometres of the wild dog barrier fence. So we're lucky sort of on the northeastern side where you can see Oakley and Winnabar, they're outside the dog fence, so the original dog fence, and so we're utilising about 79 kilometres of that. So we erected approximately 320 kilometres of new fence, and also some of our cluster had already moved into doing some of their own fencing, and so we utilised that as part of the cluster as well. So our cost relative to the area of the fence, as Amy said, is approximately $2 an acre. That's the budget we worked on. That didn't include any erection costs. So that's just basically the cost of materials, people's in-kind contributions for the clearing of the fence line, which we worked out to be about $2,000 a kilometre. So some areas wouldn't have had anywhere near those costs because their fence lines were in pretty good order. Other people would have sort of incurred more than that cost because they had to clear a lot of timber off and then get the fence line in order. And I think the preparation of the fence line is probably one of the most important things because you're looking at long-term things there, and you don't want to sort of have water being able to run down the fence and that sort of thing. So it's important that where the fence is going to sit, you try and get sort of some sort of camber, like the middle of the road or something, so the water drains to the outside of your grading, and then you drain the water off on the outside rather than have big drains across the fence line and things. So we ended up with about $900,000 from Southwest NRM. Our total budget was about $2.2 million, which included, as I said, our in-kind contributions from our landholders. Our fencing materials cost us about $1.423 million. And so that, at the time when we did our fencing things, it cost us $4,058.75 per kilometre for the materials plus the freight, which was $146 a kilometre to get it out here to Morven. And then to get the group sort of organised, we had a management team which were basically a group of us that got together to do our application and also to get together and talk to people in our area about becoming part of this. And we became an incorporated body, which is pretty normal these days. We just adopted the model rules from an incorporated body because our group sort of is not too uptight about a lot of things. I know in some areas some people weren't too happy about some of the rules and things, but most of our people around here tend to go with the flow. And we ended up with a tax file number, of course, and we registered for GST. So we've hopefully got all those bases covered. In the management team, we were conscious of trying to make sure we had some young people involved. So one of our daughters, who's an accountant, sort of looks after the treasury side of things, which has been very good because they're very sort of competent as far as computers and those sort of things go. And she's actually been a great help to other groups that have been sort of starting up and helping them just through that process. And then another young girl that's around here, she handles all our secretarial type stuff. And then we don't really have a body corporate as such. The body corporate type system, that was basically looking at our maintenance fund type system, and what we're doing there is we've agreed that we'll put in a contribution of 2 cents an acre a year on the area we're working in. It gives us about $20,000 a year, and we're going to cap that maintenance fund at $60,000. So once we get approximately 3 years of contributions, we'll cap that maintenance fund, and then we'll sit and wait and see what sort of issues we have and how quickly it goes down, so that we don't have a big heap of other people's money sitting in a fund not doing anything. So that's why we decided to sit at that level. So the reason why you can see the outline of the cluster is a bit squiggly. What we did when we set up the cluster was we tried to look after the people who had sort of been looking after everybody else. And so we were trying to look after all the people that had been part of our coordinated trapping program, our coordinated baiting program initially, and then also people that have been part of our coordinated trapping program. And essentially they're all one and the same people. So that's why the outline of our cluster got a few squiggles and things. And also we tried to sort of go around any country where we thought people who hadn't contributed to our group in any way, and also people have had a lot of green country, which would have made sort of getting on top of our total grazing pressure a little bit harder. So if we go to the next slide then, so what this is allowing us to do, our fence has only just closed. We gave everybody a deadline of the 19th of December, and we were very, very close to sort of hitting that deadline, but we didn't quite make it. We still had a few people that had a few kilometres of fence outstanding, so we just got it done as quickly as possibly could, and it was all completed before the new year. So that made everything good from our perspective. As it sort of, then it goes on to sort of effect on pasture. Is that right, Julie?
Sorry.
You there?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, I'll just try and bring it up on my phone to see if I can get the presentation, that's all.
No worries. So on your results page on the screen that everyone's seeing at the moment, we're looking at the destruction mitigation permits and those having greater impact now with the fence being closed.
Yeah.
The cost recovery was anticipated to be around 3 years, but actually occurred in some cases within 18 months.
Yeah, I'll get it up here in a minute and I'll be right.
Okay. I might just keep reading through, and you can jump in and add comment whenever you
okay, no, I'm right now. Yep.
Okay, cool.
Yep.
Right.
So people for a long time in our area have been using the destruction and mitigation permits to try and control roo numbers within our area. But the biggest problem is they shoot one roo inside and 10 more will come in from outside, particularly if we've had rain in this area and the roos are moving sort of through. I think one thing that people have got to wrap their heads around, though, is that, I mean, everybody on this webinar may understand it, but roos were never, ever in the numbers that they're in years and years ago. So if people are talking about what naturally sort of was around here before white man came out here, I know it's written in Major Mitchell's diaries when he came through here, sort of travelling between the Warrego, which is in Charleville, and the Maranoa, which is at Mitchell. They had a hell of a job sort of finding something to shoot to eat. And this mass migration of roos that people sort of talk about, it's really only sort of happened since white man started to increase watering points and control fires and do all that sort of thing. So it's not necessarily a natural thing that used to happen before white man started to sort of become involved in the environment. So there were very, very few roos in a lot of these areas because they didn't have access to natural water points. The cost recovery basis, that's sort of one fellow who's part of our cluster group, Tim Williams. He anticipated that it would take him 3 years to recover the cash that he'd invested in fencing himself. So he's inside our cluster, but he's also fenced himself in. So he started his fencing program before we started our cluster group, and he anticipated that it would take him 3 years to get his costs back from his fencing program, but he sort of said that it occurred within an 18-month period. So he went from sort of having 60% lambings to 100% lambings. He got control of his total grazing pressure and did some quite significant internal fencing as well as his external fencing. And to go and see his place, we were down there, I think it was December last year. We had some Western Australian blokes over here, and it was unbelievable to see his country compared to the state our country was in, sort of north of Morven. So you could readily see the effects that was happening. So, yeah, there's dramatic increases, as it says there, in available pasture after resting, purely because you've got control of your total grazing pressure, and then that there says, yeah, lambing percentage has increased from 60 to 100%. And then on a personal note, I mean, we would anticipate raising our merino ewe levels back to, ewe numbers back to what they were sort of pre-dogs. So we would hope to get back up to 3,000 ewes here. And one of the things that I'm sort of been really interested in and keen on is that the coordinated baiting programs have had a significant made a significant difference in increasing native wildlife, and sort of they range from sort of echidnas and things. Once when I was a child, were quite rare to see them. Now we see them very regularly. Plain turkeys weren't in this area. I saw one when I was 11, one when I was 16, and now I wouldn't say they're not far off a nuisance, but people hit them along the main roads quite regularly and wreck their windscreens and things. We've seen the little bettongs sort of come back into our area. They're the little sort of rat-tailed kangaroo type things, and then just any of the ground-dwelling birds and or animals. So there've been significant increases in carpet snakes and those sort of things, which we never ever used to see before, and our lizards, any animal that nests on the ground, because we got rid of cats and foxes, generally rates the young that they, from the eggs they lay, and that goes back on to ducks around dams and that sort of thing. Before our coordinated baiting programs, you go and see a mob of ducks on a dam with a heap of young ones. You go back the next day and half would be gone, the next day half would be gone again, so they'd only end up with a couple. Now you go to any of the dams, when we do get rain, we've got water in them, whatever ducklings you usually see on the first day you go there, they're there sort of until they grow up, apart from any natural sort of attrition that may happen. And I just really can't stress it enough, the fact that I just can't remember when I last saw a fox. It's that long ago, and certainly wild cats, I just haven't seen any in recent memory. I carry a rifle with me all day, every day, so be it on a bike or in a vehicle, so if I do see any, I'm keen to shoot them, but I haven't fired a shot at one of them in anger for a while. What else does it say there? Is that all that it says there, Julie?
Yeah, just that you'll be continuing with the annual baiting programs
and
a few other pest control measures once the fence is completed.
And that's what we think is very important, because our fence may not be able to keep cats and foxes out of it because of the size of the holes. Little foxes and little cats will be able to get through that all right, and probably piglets. So we're conscious that just because we've got the fence up, it won't be a stop to our baiting programs. And we've just the last week done our coordinated baiting program sort of in preparation for the dogger. The dogger, as far as I know, is here. I haven't seen him. He's sort of as wily as the dogs, but he's in the area, and so one of the ways we can help him is to actually keep our program up, because that gets rid of foxes and things that may set his traps off. But as I said, we just sort of don't see any of them up in this area. So then it moves on to fence design, is that right?
Yes.
Yep. Okay. So our fence, it ends up being about 1.7 high, give or take, when we erect it. So we've got we use a 1.8 metre netting, and with about 30 centimetres of that on the ground, and then we put a barbed wire on top of that, which is 10 centimetres above the netting. The reason why we went for a fixed knot netting and a fixed knot and using the one sort of wire as for our apron is that the fixed knot is the strongest knot available. So where you've got the most pressure, which is at the bottom of the fence, we just sort of felt that if we had a hinge joint knot down there, which some of the companies are providing, it's a weaker knot. And so we were keen to have the strongest possible knot at where the most pressure is. So that was why we went with that sort of fence. And also by having the apron as part of the total fence, when you strain the fence, the apron's strained, and you basically have a lot of trouble lifting the apron off the ground any more than 30 centimetres, and when you let it go, it just whacks back on the ground. And the apron, we felt, was sort of an integral part of what we were trying to do, because we didn't want to give animals the opportunity to start to try and dig. Now, if an animal gets its nose through a little hole or something, it digs. I'm a bit of a believer that the digging is in frustration, because we have had animals digging along the fence, but I think it's basically out of frustration, and usually the digging will be there for a little while and then it just disappears. I don't believe that those animals have got enough brains to know they've got to dig a hole 1 foot deep, sort of to allow their body to get through the other side and then dig up when they get out. We spaced our steel posts at 8 metre intervals. We thought that gave us enough integrity in the fence. And our posts are 2.250 metres high, and we end up with about 50 centimetres in the ground, I think. And everybody put in steel strainer posts and corner assemblies. We were sort of looking at trying to standardise those between the group, but it just sort of got out of control because everybody's got a different idea of what the best strainer assembly is. So all we said there was, well, you put them in, if they move, you replace them. So that sort of put everybody on notice, I suppose. And we don't use any inline strainers. The only place people have used inline strainers is to change the side that the apron might be on. And then when we first started fencing, there were a few blokes that sort of were a bit old school, and they started off putting inline strainers in, but it didn't take them too long to not put the strainers in. And I think one of the longest distances that I know between straining assemblies is about 8.1 kilometres, I think. And so all we do when we strain up the fence, we run out whatever your vehicle is capable of straining. So if you've got a good tractor, you might be able to strain up 1 kilometre of fence. If you've only got a truck, you can strain 600 to 800 metres. And so you strain it up, you hook it onto about 6 or 8 pegs, and then you let it off, and the pegs will bend back to about 10 o'clock. And then when you hook the next lot of wire up and you strain it up, when you pull that lot of netting up and get the posts back sort of reasonably straight, you've got the same tension on either side of the post. So that was all we were looking to try and do. And when you think about it, an inline strainer post really only supports 4 or 5 posts either side of that inline strainer. It's just something that we're used to doing, and certainly with plain wire fence is probably essential, but with this type of fencing, it's certainly not essential. So we go on to the next slide then, and that photo there of the truck, that's just the first load of materials that arrived here, so that was why we took that photo. So then we go on to the next slide, and this just shows one of the trail. It wasn't a purpose-built trailer. This was a trailer that people owned to carry their bobcat around, and then they built a frame which bolts on the top of the trailer. And as it says there, the net rolls are netting at 250 kilos, so you don't want to be humping too many of them around on your own or with somebody else. And so on that trailer, I think they can put about 8 rolls of netting sort of in a single height fashion. If they could certainly go up higher if they wanted to, but that was all they used to put out. And so the roll just rolls back and it drops into place to be dispensed. And then so we modified it to put it on the back of a truck, and all we did when we put it on the back of the truck was just basically built the bit that the roll sits in. So and then just bolt it onto the back of the truck, and it did exactly the same thing. You know, you could put 17 or 18 rolls on a truck or more, depending on how big a truck you've got. And then, as it says there, we recommend recommend rolling the netting out over the top, because that way when you finish your roll, it just digs in the ground, whereas if you roll it out underneath, everybody knows what happens when you get to the end of a roll of netting. It all takes off again and wants to roll itself back up again. So it eliminates the need for one person to sort of be there. And we were out helping somebody do some fencing, and I was putting out the netting, and the blokes in front of me were putting out the pegs, and I basically could keep up to them on my own, rolling out the netting and joining it together with the crimps. So the idea is to try and make it as simple as possible. So sometimes, depending on which way you're going, sometimes you might have to, when we strain the wire up, sometimes we have the bottom in close to the peg, so you've got to lift the netting up over to the top of the post, and other times it might sort of end up that you're straining it out and you've got to pull it up so you have the top closest to the posts. But either way, you still get the same job done, and you get the wire up in place. So then you go on and you just see a few other little photographs of that dispensing system, and then we've got a just an inline strainer sort of showing there, and that was just a position where they changed the apron from one side to the other. And one of the reasons for changing the apron, the further they went along that fence, it had a lot of mulga trees on it, and there were a lot of roots just sticking up. And the trouble is, if you drag the netting across the root system, sometimes they might be going into the netting, and so you end up with it ripping your netting if you're not careful. So that was why they did what they did there. And then just the next photo shows just the crimping of the netting. We don't always sort of do it standing up, but if you're on your own, you can do it with it on the ground. It's not a difficult process and pretty simple, and we like using the crimps. Other people have just tied the netting together, so it's really whatever takes your fancy. And then there's finished product sort of with the crimps there. Then we go on to the floodways. That's a floodway design that a bloke used in the Mitchell area, and that's just to allow the netting to not clip into the post. And so when the water comes along, the water hopefully will lift the netting up and allow all the debris to move through. And then the next photo there is just a different way to stop the netting clipping in. That's just putting 3-inch PVC over the top of the posts, and so they're about 1 metre high, so that'll stop the netting clipping back into our posts. And then the next one shows the skirt on the fence line, and the great thing about it is that it really does follow the contour of the ground. One of the blokes was in some very light sandy country, and he was having a hell of a job sort of getting it graded in any tidy fashion, and he was worried about how the netting was going to sit, but once he put the netting up, it just conformed to the ground contour that he had, and it was just as good as when you're doing it along on hard red country. So we just feel you've only got to give those animals the opportunity to get their noses under your fence, and you've got trouble, and that's why we felt it was just so important to have a skirt on that fence. The direction the skirt sort of is doesn't sort of matter so much, but yeah, we just think that sometimes you've got to have the skirt inside because of the way the water's flowing, and other times you've got the skirt on the outside. So normally the skirt we put on is on the outside, but if there's water running in the other direction, well then you've got to be sensible about it and put the skirt back on the other side. And then there's just a couple of photos there sort of showing what people did. These are gates that we also purchased from Clipex. We think they're a fabulous gate. They're about 1.8 high, those gates. That first photograph there, they're 2 12-foot gates together, and they cost us $110 plus GST. And then there's another photo there showing 2 lots, 2 gates going between 2 different neighbours, and they're 14-foot gates, those ones, and they're about $130 plus GS2, I think. But you wouldn't bother building gates because they're just magnificent, those gates, and do everything you want to do. Then we've just got another photo there, sort of showing the fence line, and one of the things that we wanted to make sure people did when we cleared the fence, we wanted the fence cleared 1.5 tree heights off the fence, and everybody that put their fence up did that, and they also made sure that they did the same thing on the neighbour's side of the fence, and so we ended up with a great outcome sort of from that point of view, and we've got a fence line that's cleared, and apart from sort of when we've got significant sort of windstorms or something like that, there shouldn't be a chance of anything falling on the fence, and we were very conscious of trying to make sure that people respected that. And then there's another photograph there just showing that's a fence that we did on our boundary, and then it goes out onto a stock route. And then the last photograph there, it's a similar sort of thing, but it's just showing the finished fence. And yeah, look, I'll take my hat off to everybody that participated in it, because they really did do a marvellous job, and were very, very good in the way they did the preparation of their fence line and also the finished product. So it's a very easy fence to put up. Basically, most of the work is in getting everything ready, and once you're ready to do your fencing, we just sort of couldn't recommend utilising a Clipex product high enough. And we just did a little fence around our house here, and we used sort of some 1290-15, I think, and so it's got 12 wires in it and some Clipex posts, and there's no tying off. It's just makes everything so simple. One of the things we didn't sort of talk about early on was our costings, and what we ended up with, people sort of contributing. Along the fence line, people who had fence on them had to contribute $1,550 a kilometre, and those people inside the cluster who didn't have fence on them contributed 50 cents an acre. But those people who've only got a very short distance, so the minimum cost that people had to pay was the 50 cents an acre cost. So if those people who had fence on them and it didn't come up to 50 cents an acre, so if they had $30,000, if their fence line contribution didn't come to 15,000, they had 30,000 acres, sorry, and their fence line contribution didn't come to $15,000, well then they had to pay the acre rate. If their fence line contribution at $1,550 was over that, well, they paid the higher amount. And so that's what how we did it. Other groups have funded theirs in different fashions, so there's no one way to do this. That was just sort of suited our group, and that we could sell it to people. And so, yeah, look, the whole thing with all this is if people haven't started talking to neighbours, the most important thing is to start to talk to neighbours, because it's been a really good project, this. It's sort of not only from our own point of view, but certainly from the point of view of building relationships within the group, and people who we didn't sort of see either socially or any other sort of fashion. We certainly see a lot more of them now, and I don't think anybody could be any more pleased with what's happened than we are at the moment, because it's just such a great thing moving forward from a grazing perspective. So that's about all I got to say, I think, Julie. So.
Thank you very much for that, Will. That was excellent. Look, we are running a little bit over time, but there are quite a lot of questions coming through. So I might rattle a few off, Will, and we'll just quickly run through those.
Yep.
So looking at the map of your cluster,
yep.
We had some main roads running through the
yep.
actual cluster there. Can you talk
yep.
us through how you manage that?
Yeah, well, we just got permits to sort of come to within 12 metres of the edge of the road. So that's the edge of the white line on the road. And then we've built just a 15 or 20 metre funnel on there. So that's on each side of the road. And then we've got those motion activated beepers on those openings. And also we intend to, one of the things is the our trapper, if ever he's got a hole in the fence he doesn't want roos or dogs going through, he just hangs shopping bags on the fence. So we're not going to do that, but we thought we'd probably get some bunting and stuff that just flapped around in the wind, and also possibly put a little flag or something there. So it doesn't take much to sort of, we don't think, to keep the animals out. And then also we'll be putting sort of motion activated cameras on those openings just to monitor what's going on.
Okay, excellent. So who erected the fence and who does the maintenance?
Yeah, well, everybody erected their own sort of fence. We were going to get somebody to do it, but of course when you're doing things like this, some people want to do it tomorrow. And so we just came up with an agreement that if people wanted to erect their own fence, they would be compensated $300 a kilometre for the erection of the fence. And so that was why we did that, because everybody had a different time frame. So if you had somebody putting the fence up, he's not going to do it all sort of in a couple of months. So people did their own erection of the fence, and everybody was more than happy to do that. I mean, that way they can work along at their own pace, and when you're putting up fence lines, you've got to clear it and grade it and do all these sort of things. So you as a landholder would probably be involved in it anyway.
Yeah.
And what was the second part of the question? Oh, the maintenance.
Yeah. How does that work?
Yeah, well, it'll just be with the maintenance, the fence, the people with fence line on them, they will be required to maintain it just like any normal boundary fencing. So where the cluster group will step in is where there is acts of sort of God, basically. So be it a big flood event or a big windstorm or something like that, just normal maintenance along the fence line, the likes of grading and those sort of things, they'll be the responsibility of the landholder. We have actually bought ourselves a spray unit out of some other funding that we got sort of through a pest and weed grant, and we're going to utilise that to try and keep the grass down along the fence line, and also to keep weeds within the cluster under control. But the normal maintenance of a fence, it will be no different to anybody maintaining just a normal property boundary.
And has there been much talk of people within the cluster? Obviously there's been a transition probably more towards cattle prior to the fence being in place. Are there people now looking to do the same thing you're doing and move back into small stock?
We haven't put any commitments on people sort of, or asked them for commitments as to what they're going to do, but this will just allow them to run whatever enterprise they wish to run without sort of being dictated to by vermin, I suppose. So we've not sort of asked people to give any commitment as to what they're going to do, but sheep are a very important, sheep/goats are a very important part of our environment. I mean, they do a lot of work sort of keeping regrowth and woody weeds under control, and so from the point of view of being a landholder, I think you'd be crazy not to move back into some sort of sheep or goat operation, because it'll do a lot of good from a regrowth point of view. And also, I mean, the DPI talk about it, you can run 10% of sheep without affecting your ability to run the same number of cattle. So there's lots of evidence out there to say that it's would be something that would be very beneficial.
And given that you did access some sort of funding from Southwest NRM to complete the fencing, what sort of monitoring or reporting obligations are you under? Is there assessments being done on the grazing pressure or regeneration of perennials or anything like that?
Yeah, there are, and a lot of that has been actually undertaken by departmental people. So we've already got somebody here prior to the fence being completed who's doing, what are they called, trans something along the fence. So every kilometre he rakes the fence line and checks out what animals are sort of in there. And so that was done, transects they're called, that's right. So that's checking on the animals sort of within the cluster, and you know, we'll just from our own we'll be looking for anecdotal information as far as what's happening. But as I sort of said, I mean, our native animals sort of within this area have benefited greatly from what we've already done, and I just see sort of this will be an added bonus now to those sort of things. And I mean, I might also add, sort of prior to 2002, we had quite a significant koala population in this area, and it was the drought of 2002 sort of wiped them out. And one of the things that we'd be keen to try and do, we haven't had sort of serious talks to Koalas Australia, whatever they're called, but I mean, in some areas they are sort of shooting koalas because the populations are sort of decimating sort of the areas in which they're living, and yet an area like this would benefit greatly from sort of having some koala populations reintroduced into this area. And the other thing that I think is important, I mean, there's talk now around the Currawinja National Park of double fencing the blasted thing. Well, all the people have got to do is get really serious about their control measures, because as I've said sort of quite a few times, we just don't see cats and foxes here, and if they're serious about sort of wanting, you know, and we'd be happy to let bilbies go inside this area because I firmly believe they would survive, but if they're serious about looking after these things, I mean, you can't only build a fence around it, you've got to do something else, and baiting's a very, very important part of that. It's just unbelievable what happens once you get a decent coordinated baiting program happening.
Excellent. Oh, thanks very much for that, Will. Look, we've just had couple of other questions come through, just in relation to, you know, are you having things like wombats and stuff digging under the fence, or would they create larger holes and roos and so forth, or?
No, well, we're not in a wombat area, so, and certainly if a wombat sort of stumbled across the fence and the apron was on the outside, he wouldn't stand a hope in hell. If the apron was on the inside, well, perhaps old mate might be able to dig in, but yeah, we don't have any wombats here, to the best of my knowledge.
Yeah. Okay, excellent. Well, look.
The other thing that you know, we'd be interested in seeing reintroduced in here, and as I say, we've got a lot of plain turkeys back in this area, but you know, people do talk about there being scrub turkey mounds in our area, and I mean, we'd be interested in seeing them reintroduced into our area. I mean, just purely from the point of view is that if they were part of the landscape here years ago and cats and foxes got rid of them, well, now's the opportunity for them to come back into this area, but they'd have to be reintroduced because I don't think the poor buggers could fly out here.
No problem. All right. Well, thank you very much, Will, for that presentation. That was excellent. Both yourself and Amy gave a great overview there, and we've had some excellent questions come through from the audience. Look, if anyone does have any further questions or wants more information, we do have both Amy and Will's contact information up on the screen there at the moment. And I can also circulate that to everyone who's registered for the webinar afterwards as well. I'd like to also mention that, look, this is number 4 in a series of webinars that we've held for goat producers over the last few months. So if you have missed any of the past webinars, which have covered everything from looking at sort of slaughter number trends and overseas sort of trends and so forth in some of the different export markets, through to how to, improve the genetics of your herd and manage internal pests and so forth, please hop along to the MLA website there. All the past webinars are saved there, and today's webinar will also be saved there as well. And I should mention that our next webinar at the moment is tentatively scheduled for the 24th of March. We've got someone coming along from Live Corp to give a bit of an overview about the live export industry within the goat industry and the different sorts of programs and systems that are in place to ensure animal health and welfare, as well as different programs that are in place to help and support the people who are sending goats overseas in the live export trade. So look, once again, thank you very much to our guest speakers, Amy and Will, today, and thank you to everyone who made the time to dial into today's webinar. As I mentioned, I'll be emailing around, hopefully this afternoon, a link to where this webinar has been saved on the MLA website, so you can forward that around to anyone who else you feel might be interested, as well as copies of the some of the fencing specifications from Will's project, and just a bit of a template of the contract that was developed as part of that Morven Cluster. So look, thank you very much everyone. We're going to end the webinar now, and hopefully we'll see you on the 24th of March for the next one. Thank you and have a great day.
Thank you.